Minute. We're live. Yeah. Excuse me, everybody. Mics and video is live. Uh-oh.
Oh, got so quiet all of a sudden.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Committee of the Whole on March 7th, 2023. This is my first time in the chair, so I'm really excited to be here and welcome you all. I would like to first acknowledge that the city of Maple Ridge carries out its business on the traditional unceded territories of the Katzie First Nation and the Kwantlen First Nation. And I'd now like to hand it over. I did call the meeting to order, right? Okay, good, perfect. Just want to make sure. I'll hand it over to our clerk over here to walk us through some of the procedures for the day.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available to the public for playback on our website in accordance with Council Policy 3.112. Committee of the Whole is the initial venue for council review of information to ensure that council can debate and vote on issues at a future council meeting. No voting takes place on bylaws or resolutions during Committee of the Whole. This meeting is being conducted through the city's One Meeting platform, and today council will be using voting cards to register their votes. Green is for favor, in favor, red is opposed, yellow is point of order, and the results will then be logged into the system. To be put on the speaker list, please physically raise your hand so that the chair can add you to the list. For members of the public who would like to speak during the community forum portion of the meeting, if you are participating electronically, please register as a speaker by clicking on the microphone icon in the One Meeting portal and turn on your camera and clearly state your name and city of residence before beginning your comments. If you are attending the meeting in person, please come forward to the podium when the mayor or Madam Chair invites you to be a speaker and clearly state your name and city of residence before beginning your comments. And with that, we can proceed to the next item, approval of the agenda.
Thank you very much. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? It's been moved by Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Schiller. All those in favor? Carried. Okay, moving on to the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the Committee of the Whole minutes of February 21st, 2023? Moved by Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Youssef. Any errors or omissions in those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so moving on to item 5.1. Give me a second. So it's the application 2023-004-RZ for 22481 Brown Avenue, 12064 Fraser Avenue, and it's from RS1 to RM3. And I'll invite staff up to give us a presentation on this.
I believe Mr. Goddard is going to be doing the presentation. And give me 1 second, Mr. Goddard. I'm just going to pull it up.
Welcome.
Thank you. All right, this is our first application this afternoon. It's an apartment in our town center at 22481 Brown Avenue and 12064 Fraser Street, just to the north of us here. It's for first reading only. There'll be a development permit following as well as a potential variance permit. It's medium high-rise apartment designation. It permits 6 stories and above. It's a 5 or 6 story building. It's zoned RS1, being single family now. They'll be proposing to move to the RM3 zone. The existing site is almost half an acre, and there'll be some dedication taken, which will reduce the size of the lot slightly, but they're proposing 41 units in total. This is the property shown in red, just to the north of the shopping center here, outlined in red. There's our designation that permits the form being proposed, apartment. There's the site now. There's only one single family home on the western lot, and the other one is vacant, but it's going to be a similar building to the structures surrounding it. So we have, again, 41 units being proposed in a 5-story building form. There are studios, 1 bedroom plus den, 2 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms plus den. So there will be able to accommodate families in this building. on a fair number of units. They're a fairly large size. The vehicles are shown here as 61 parking spaces are required. They have more than required. We also have a cash in lieu requirement here of $20,000 per stall. We're purchasing 7 proposed here. There's also a community amenity charge applied to the 41 units, which will render the city $180,600 should the application proceed to final reading. This shows the site plan. The baby blue color there is the outline of the building. The beige colors show the road dedication being required. They've never had really development on this site, so that's why there's a fair number of dedication being taken on the southern property lines to accommodate Brown Avenue. Excuse me. We're recommending moving forward to first reading under that bylaw, and then they'll have to make the development variance permit bylaws, and you will see that again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think the motion, just because it's not written out here, is that we move this to the council agenda tonight. That's the motion that needs to be approved.
That's correct.
Or needs to be on the table. So it's been moved by Councillor Youssef and seconded by Councillor Duick. All right, questions, comments, not comments, just questions. It's Committee of the Whole. Okay, Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to staff. Are we expecting variances to be part of this application moving forward? And if so, how many? And if possibly we can address if we're expecting variances when it comes to the parking.
There are a slightly less than required under the bylaw. That's why they're purchasing 7 stalls and they're paying that fee for that. We are in the town center, very close proximity to public transit, and walkability, of course, is excellent with this site. So yes, but there is a slight variance required. There'll probably be some slight setback variances to the front face of the building because of the road dedication being required, but the building height is fine.
Thank you to staff for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair. That was my question.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Rumi, and it'll be Councillor Schiller after.
Thank you. It's a similar question. It really has to do with the parking. So it's supposed to be 46 and it's down to 39.
Correct.
And what is the reason for the variance? Because the parking is going to be tight around there. You got the school there.
Yep.
You got the traffic that's going on. I'm concerned about how that would interrupt with the overall.
There is a fair bit of street parking available in this area along the backside of the mall. It's used fairly regularly. All apartments in the area probably have very similar variances being requested. The applicant is paying as an alternative to providing it. The dedication was a big hit to the applicant. He didn't anticipate that when they originally bought the property. So that reduced the size of the parking structure possible. And of course, to go underground another level is very onerous. So instead, they've proposed to, rather than reduce the density, to seek the variance of requested but pay for it rather than just seeking an outright relaxation.
Okay. Do we, because of the school, do we anticipate any traffic jams of parents dropping their kids off in that whole area there? Do you see that as being an issue at all?
Luckily, Brown is going to be a major street east-west along here. The elementary school is still a significantly, 2 blocks north, and its problems of access are really due to it doesn't have a through flow road to the north. So they have to turn around at the north end of Edge, I think it is. So they are planning, I understand, some improvements to that school, maybe redevelopment, and that may change the access related to it, I suspect. So that may help, but we're in the town center and this density is expected and people should adjust to the traffic pattern, I think, as density occurs, and it is occurring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Schiller.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if there was any information available at this point around outdoor space being provided to the residents of the building, as well as any information available on maintaining some of the mature trees on the property.
The architects are here. Maybe I'll ask them to maybe address that question. Marcella?
Thank you, Chuck. Hello, my name is Marcela Zunino. I'm here for Garcia Zunino Architects. Can you formulate the question, please, again, Major Councilors?
Yes, I'm just looking for any information that you can provide at this stage around outdoor amenities for the residents, as well as preservation of the mature trees that are on the lot.
Okay, there are two trees fairly significant on the lot. The one that is in the center in between the two lots will not be able to stay. The one that is more facing the lane, we're trying to save it as of now. It's not apparently in the area where the parking lot will be. And unless we needed to increase the size of the underground structure, we hope it can stay because we cannot have parking access from the lane, given the site itself. So we were hoping to maintain that large, I think it's a large cedar. And in terms of common amenity, because the site is constricted by the parking access through Fraser and also shortened a little bit by the road dedication of Brown Avenue. The setback at the front is smaller, is narrower than usual, but we were hoping for a larger backyard. And also we have on the 5th floor, like a terrace facing north for the occupants to share. We think we have been involved in several buildings in this same area. And our experience while being in those buildings is that the views to the north are quite spectacular. So being in the 5th floor on that terrace, I think it'll be a very good asset to have for the building.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just
Councillor
so
Dillard.
council knows, the Ninos have been the architects for 4 or 5, 6 big buildings in our town center in this area. So they're very familiar with our desires as well as the results have been quite good, I think, from what we see there.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Dulac.
Thank you. So my question is probably to, I'm not sure who to, it's a follow-up to the question around Eric Langton and the expansion there. So wondering if staff can reach out to the school district because they do have frontage on 227th as well. So there is an opportunity to have less congestion going down Edge Street if they have access off of both. So wondered if staff could reach out in advance of them looking at any designs.
Through the chair, I think the city staff are arranging a meeting soon with them. We've been told by the school board that there may be some redevelopment plans there. So we will have a full team there to help them with that. Thank you.
Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the developers for taking time to come out today too. Much appreciated. My first question around unit mix. Thank you for the provision of the concept of 2-bedroom apartments in this complex. What about 3-bedroom? Any plans there?
I think the 2-bedroom plus den are kind of, that's a funny area in the market, but that's like a 3-bedroom unit. But again, I think there was 2 bedrooms of 10 or 11 and then 5 of almost 3 bedrooms, I guess you could call them. In a 41 unit building, I think that's fair. In the size, there's an awful lot of 1-bedroom plus den as well, which are larger than the typical 1-bedroom. So I think the unit mix in this building is pretty good. But we are meeting with applicants now and we are hearing council saying about 3 bedrooms and we are pushing more for that. And so it's really a function here. We're tight on parking again. So as you increase the density, parking gets squeezed. As you increase the unit size, maybe parking needs rise with that larger unit. So it's a bit of a balance, but we are trying to emphasize more of that. Does that help you?
I appreciate that. Thank you, staff, through the chair. I would be very curious to hear more about the provision of 3-bedroom units. I don't think 2 bedrooms and plus den are quite the same thing. I'm curious through the chair to staff if the applicants have talked about compliance with the STEP code and any plans around that area.
The STEP code isn't a requirement yet. That's moving forward. This is first reading still, so we're a little bit early, but we can certainly raise that. They're here and they're hearing those comments, and I think they can look to some sort of a STEP code level, I think, through the normal work moving forward. Yes.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate that the step code is voluntary now, and I think that'll be interesting to look forward. Look at as we move forward. I'm noticing that we are on the bike network path here and also the pedestrian connectivity path here. Any plans through the chair to staff or to the developer? Any plans for bike parking and e-bike parking? And then the third question is EV charging.
Right. Our parking bylaw requires the rough-ins for EV. We'll talk about those issues with them when we get to second reading. We'll inform you about that. The proposal meets the parking bylaw right now. There is a slight variance on the percentage of parking stalls for bikes that are vertical on the wall as opposed to horizontal in the space below, but it's a function of the reduced area in the underground. So that would be one of the variances we're requiring, but they do meet the overall number. It's just how they're laid out in the underground so far that we notice there might be a need for a relaxation, but we will detail that out for you at second.
I look forward to hearing more about that during second. And I note that vertical bike parking is very different from horizontal bike parking. It's very difficult even for me to put my bike up vertically. So I'm really curious to hear more about that as we move forward. And then I'm just curious, just thinking back to our PRC, Parks, Recreation and Cultural Master Plan conversation from last weekend, knowing that park development in our community will come through the development process. I understand and respectful of the fact that there already has been dedication required from this property and for this rezoning. But can staff speak to the availability of dedication for some solid following on Councillor Schiller's point on like green space, on street trees, trees beside the pedestrian sidewalk? What are we looking at here?
The subdivision servicing bylaw requires street trees as a component of the upgrades from the in an urban area. So there will be street trees. Those will be detailed for you at the development permit stage, where it's probably pretty early for them to have dealt with that design detail at this point. But certainly they will have to provide those when we get the overall off-street design for the public realm. The road dedication is substantial on Brown, and that will accommodate the bike connections, I believe, east-west along this road. But again, those details are not here yet, but they will be.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, developers. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions just on Councillor Dewick. So it is a rebuild of Eric Langdon, so it'll be a completely different footprint than what it is now, which obviously opens up opportunities for discussions and what things look like. And it's a rebuild expansion, and there's the community hive in there as well. So that'll be interesting, looking forward to what that looks like. Quick question. This one just seems like it has a higher number of studio suites than what we've seen in the past. I understand this is downtown. What is sort of the percentage of the building? Because it's all apartment buildings around here. This is all going to be apartments.
Mm-hmm.
What is the makeup of the apartments that are surrounding this one?
The ones to the northeast are older buildings, to be honest. They're probably from the late 1990s, and they're typically less dense, larger units, more parking provided. That has gone by the wayside over the last 10 years or so. They're pushing the costs and that are pushing the densities up and unit size down. We haven't organized that. I don't think many cities have specifically set targets for various unit sizes. We would pretty much leave it to the developer to do that. However, council is free in their discussions to start thinking about targets, but that would require some research, and we should probably send our housing policy planners away to kind of look at some of those things. But more and more, I'm seeing studios as becoming the affordable step in. One bedrooms, the affordable step in for people. They're certainly not family friendly, but they get people into the market. You see a lot of them in some of the tower proposals that you'll be seeing, a lot of studios being proposed because they're affordable in a concrete form. So, I think it's a fairly healthy mix here on what the units are proposing. But again, I'm seeing some, not these folks, but I'm seeing some in the high rise really proposing small units like less than 300 square feet. And I'm not keen on that either. So we should keep an eye on that as we move forward.
Yeah, and it's, and I think it's been raised here today by other counselors around questions around green space and outdoor space with those micro
Yeah.
units. In our housing report, though it's 3 years old now, is where it sort of talks about these targets that we'll need to meet. And will that, do you know well, I guess you don't know if it's coming back to us, but do you know if it talks about?
It
The micro
does,
suites
but
are
it's
there?
mostly targeting numbers and volumes, not so much unit types,
Okay.
if I can recall correctly. But it might be worth us coming back to you in the future with some of those details that maybe were discussed with the previous council to refresh you on those numbers.
Okay,
The
thank you.
province does require us now every 5 years, in fact, to come back to council and to them, in fact, and report out on our housing stats. So you'll be seeing that a lot more common than it has in the past. So
Thank you.
that might be something we
Yeah,
could
and
look for this year to come back to.
Okay, yeah, and the legislation changed where it could
Yes.
become requirements and not just a
Correct.
housing needs.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions? Counselor, Mayor Rumi.
Thanks. You're liking the chair. Sorry, just one other quick question. I don't believe has been asked. As with most of complexes this size, with parking, one of the questions we're asking is about car charging, because that is what's happening, that's coming. Is there any, from the developer, any ideas of what they're going to do with that?
I don't think at this point yet. But the bylaw does require the rough-ins. I think council's looking at potentially moving it forward a bit more to require more than just the rough-ins. And we're raising that with all applicants now.
Okay,
So
good.
we're going to get more information as we move forward with things like parking and EV changing and unit sizes and unit types and all that. So we're trying to hear these comments from you and reflect them more and more into the new work that's coming forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just one expansion to that as well, because Mayor Rumi brought that up. Is there any requirement as we move forward and we look at the growing up of downtown? Is there any requirement as we go up to expand our public charging systems? If they put in a development of a certain size, they need to have one or two or whatever public charging on the street to help with
That would be a zoning condition, and that would be a provision that we could certainly set at the zoning stage if council decided they wanted every building to provide a public charging facility, but we'd have to consider where they would do it, on what street or how. Would you put the money towards a fund, or would you have every applicant do their own? Tesla just built their facility across the street, right? So at least we're now reinforcing what we've always done as a city. But that's just more policy discussion that council could decide to do in the
Great,
future.
thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any further discussion. It's been moved and seconded to refer this to council. All those in favor? Okay, opposed? Carried. And sorry, Councillor Dozie, is that for or oppose? It's red, it's green, so it's for. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's carried. Okay, to item number 2, and sorry, I actually did your part of the script last time. Do you want to read out what
Oh,
the
that's
next
okay.
item is?
Madam Chair, this is a first reading to permit a rezoning from RS1 to C7 to permit approximately 10,000 square feet of commercial space and 520 dwelling units. And Ms. Shafiside is going to be doing the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This presentation is for the rezoning 2023-019 rezoning for the property located on 21710 and 21728 Lougheed Highway for the first reading of the zoning amendment bylaw number 7909-2023. The purpose of this application is to rezone the properties from RS1 single detached residential to C7 Lougheed Transit Corridor high density mixed use to allow a construction of a high density mixed use development, which is at the preliminary stage, but is approximately include around 520 dwelling units as well as 929 square meters of commercial floor space at grade. The subject site, which include 2 lots, are located to the south of Lougheed Highway between 216 and 218 the street within the Lougheed Transit Corridor Area Plan, which received first reading back in December 2021. This property is also located in proximity of the Fraser River escarpment, especially a portion of this property is within the 300-meter from the crest of the Fraser River escarpment, which requires any development on this site be subject to the risk assessment that the city is undertaking at the moment. Due to the location of this property within the controlled access area of Lougheed Highway, approval of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure is required prior to final adoption of this rezoning application. The subject site is currently designated commercial under the official community plan, which allows a mix of commercial and some level of residential, but with limited density, building height, and lot coverage. This property is also designated as commercial mixed use under the Lougheed Transit Corridor Area Plan, which support rezoning to C7, which is a newly created zone that received third reading back in July 2022, which allows basically higher and increased density as well as building height and lot coverage to support a high density mixed use development. The applicant is proposing to maximize the permitted density, which is 4 FSR under the C7 zoning district. If this application is going to proceed to final adoption prior to final approval of the Lougheed Transit Corridor Area Plan, an OCP amendment will be required to redesignate the site from existing commercial to commercial mixed use that is currently permitted under the area plan. Considering the nature of the proposed development, which is mixed-use commercial residential, this development will be subject to the development permit design guideline of the OCP for residential and commercial development. This is the subject site that is comprised of 2 lots. The lots are currently vacant and have access off of Lougheed. And the lots are almost flat with the exception of the southern portion of the property that they have localized a steep slope. The property is also treated, especially at the perimeter and the northern and the southern portion of the property, which required adherence to the city tree bylaw for any tree removal and development. And this is the schematic building design. The design and proposal is at the preliminary stage. No extensive work and detailed work has been done yet, but more work needs to be done after the first reading to determine the building height, number of floors, unit mixes, unit type, building design, as well as access and parking. This development is also subject to city access policy, which requires that no access should be limited off of Lougheed Highway. The full recommendation has been provided in the report, but generally it's recommended that no further additional consultation should be required in respect to the OCP amendment if OCP amendment would be required. And the zoning amendment bylaw for bylaw number 7909-2023 received first reading, and the applicant be requested to provide further information for the complete rezoning OCP amendment, as well as development permit and development variance permit if it's required in accordance with the schedule of the development procedures bylaw. And the last recommendation would be that this application shall not proceed to second reading until the full risk assessment for the Fraser River escarpment is completed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can I get a motion to refer this to council? It's been moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Mayor Rumi. I'll open it up for questions. Okay, Councillor Schiller and then Councillor Youssef and Councillor Doze. Go ahead, Councillor Schiller.
Thank you, Chair. Staff, could you just provide me with a little bit more information on how our tree protection bylaw would apply to a property like this that is currently vacant and has some trees on it, and how that works into a development moving forward?
The bylaw applies to this property regardless whether it's vacant or it's developed. So basically, if any property has a diameter of more than 20 centimeters, would be subject to the tree bylaw, which requires replacement. In working with the applicant, we'll try our best to make sure that we will maintain and retain the trees that can be maintained. Yeah. But if because of the footprint of the building, they probably require a significant amount of tree removal, that they will be basically replaced. And as part of the next step of the review, we require applicant to provide an arborist report, which basically identifies the trees that can be retained, the trees that should be removed, and the replacement for the trees.
Great, thank you. It's just very good information to have. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to staff for the presentation. Through you to staff, Madam Chair. At first reading, do we require a geotechnical report for the proposed development?
And at this time, unfortunately not, because as a requirement under the development procedures bylaw for the Schedule I, we only require limited information, detailed information, and it's basically a preliminary site plan that shows how the proposal is in compliance with the OCP and the zoning bylaw, and a kind of a statement of the description that describe the proposal. Any detailed information will be deferred to after first reading, including geotechnical assessment report.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair. That was my question.
Thank you. Councillor Doze. Just making sure you can hear us, Councillor Doze.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
There was a break. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Sorry, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I was just going to say that 520 units, adding that to our community is something quite significant, and I'm quite impressed, and I want to thank the proponents for doing this. And my question is simple. In this risk assessment for the Fraser River encampment will be completed, because you can see that that is a very important part of this particular proposal, where it says item number 4, that this application will not proceed to a second reading until this full assessment, risk assessment is done. Do we have any timeline for that? Because we need to have these things going as soon as possible, if possible.
Through Madam Chair, if I may, I would defer this question to Director of the Engineering.
Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair to council. Staff have been working through the quantitative risk assessment process, including a group risk assessment for Lougheed Corridor. We're quite a ways through that now. We anticipate to be able to come back with additional information to council in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think, Mayor Rumi, go ahead.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Clearly, when we're looking for that spectrum of housing, this looks to be on the surface a great opportunity. I'm a little concerned, and maybe you can shed some light on it, because it says there's containing 520 dwelling units with an average unit size of 650 square feet. Well, the last time I did my math, if it's an average, then what's the bottom end of 650 square feet? So what would the smallest apartments be like? That's a concern that brought up in the last project as well. Do we have any ideas on that?
Through Madam Chair, as I mentioned, this is like a really preliminary kind of plan. We haven't worked out the detail with the architect and the applicant yet, but we can ensure you that the unit mix, all the unit mix for the family size and the smaller size will be definitely addressed through this kind of development to ensure that all the needs of the community have been addressed.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question through you to staff about the dedication of park space in this project, or maybe broadly in other projects. Could staff maybe walk me through how we decide whether dedication for park space is required in a certain development and whether it be required in this one?
True, Madam Chair. Under the legislation, we are required to each application more than 3 lots, basically, to provide park dedication. And normally based on the capacity on each lot, we may be able to, let's say, for example, if there's environmentally sensitive area or there are any space that can be dedicated and used for park in accordance with our park master plan or based on the OCP designation, we might be able to get some parkland. However, in cases like this, I believe that our option would be the payment in lieu for the parkland. So the applicant normally contribute financially and through payment in lieu to be able to help the city in order to build a park in future and acquire land for park.
Thank you. I just have a quick question around the access piece because we're moving the access from Lougheed Highway and this is really in the middle of a block. How do we accommodate that without infringing on the single family homes that are just behind there?
Through Madam Chair, there are some preliminary discussion that had happened with the applicant, which discussed the provision of new service road, which is basically to the south of the property, and that basically create like divide the block to the south. And we haven't really discussed this in detail, but this is the desire from the engineering department to provide another additional service road to the south in order to minimize the impact of the traffic, because this is a significant project and we expect that all of the properties in the same block have higher density of 4 FSR, which is kind of permitted under the C7 district zone. So one of the goal is that to create an additional service road to reduce the traffic impact on the residents to the south and the north of 117th Avenue, because at the end of the day, we expect that through development, 117th Avenue will be built to its full potential and to its kind of standard, but the amount of traffic needs to be reduced through 117. So the goal is to create a new local service road to the south of this property. What the detail needs to be worked out through this development.
Okay, and just one more question on that. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Godard.
I should also add that, of course, this is on the Lougheed Highway, which requires the ministry's approval for access. So we will not be able to get a full movement in and out. So there is an alternative access required for this land and all the lands along the south side of Lougheed. So we have to look at that in context of this development and others. Thank you.
Okay, and then just one other quick question, and this is sort of around the overarching growth of, I understand the Lougheed corridor or the transit corridor hasn't come back to us for final reading, but do we have any discussions as we grow up on Lougheed Highway around discussions with the province around like active transportation modes for the Lougheed Highway, in particular cycling infrastructure? I know there's lots of stuff going on at TransLink, and I'll leave that to Mayor Rumi to work on those pieces, but like the active transportation piece.
Thank you, Freddie. So the director, please.
Sure, thank you. Thank you. So through the chair. And so we're actively working on that currently with the Ministry of Transportation. And what we're looking at right now is how to implement bus rapid transit down Lougheed Highway. As part of that, we are looking at what we can facilitate for active transportation connections to that infrastructure. And so that's an active piece of work that's ongoing. In the short term, the city also has plans to improve conditions along Lougheed Highway for active transportation. We've previously installed multi-use paths along portions of it, and we have plans to come in and fill some of those gaps as well. And that's within the city's capital plan in the near future. So kind of a two-pronged approach there for short-term future, and then that longer-term approach.
Okay, and then I know we're also in the middle of a strategic active transportation plan as well. And that takes into account some of the pieces from the Lougheed corridor as well, right? When they're looking at that?
Yes, absolutely. So through the strategic transportation plan, that's a long-term vision of the entire network. And so that takes that into consideration as well.
As we build them. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. All right. So all those in favor of referring this to council, you're voting? Just want to make sure. Is that a question or a vote? Oh, okay, just wanted to make sure. Sorry, all those in favor of referring it to council? Okay, so that has passed, carried.
Appears unanimous. Yes.
Okay, moving on to item 5.3.
Next item, 5.3, is a rezoning from RS1 to RT2, and it permits the construction of 4 dwelling units clustered around an internal courtyard. And I believe Mr. Goddard is doing this one as well.
Thank you.
One sec, Mr. Goddard.
No problem. All right, it's a courtyard proposal. It's quite unique. 4 units on a smallish property. It's kind of a nice infill project for council to see. We don't have a lot of these, but we anticipate in the future they're a nice way of fitting a little bit more density into established neighborhoods. So this is a good example of an early version of one. It's on River Road, 1 lot, 21585 River Road. It's going to second reading. Under that bylaw, it's urban residential as the whole neighborhood is, so it's just a slight increase in density from 1 home to 4 on about 1/4 of an acre. There's the site right at the corner of River Road and 216th. Access will be both from a front driveway onto 216th and rear lanes at the back. It's a nice way to split the access for multiple units. There's the designation showing the urban designation. There's the context of the area is all single family. Again, it's a ground-oriented residential infill project of 4 units under the RT2 zone. It's a relatively new zone. The FSR is permitted 0.75, and they are at that point here. There's 4 units in total, but 2 of them are separate kind of single-family homes with 1 duplex attachment. There are 10 parking spaces provided, which are 2 more than required under the zone. And they all have accessory garages to accommodate the 2 units. There's also parking of bikings in the homes as well and in the garages. There are some variances required. The courtyard form does require some pushing and pulling of setbacks to accommodate the extra units because they're in a single family form. They're not stacked. So of course that eats up more area. So the front yard setbacks being reduced from 6 meters to 4.5. We have rear yard setback, which is along the lane in this case of 3.5 for one of the dwellings. That's really the garage components of the buildings. We have some building height increases to 30 feet, which is less than 3 stories, but it is more of a 3-story form because these are small units. They do have to go vertically to some point to accommodate the extra units. And then we have a relaxation of the road standard on River Road from 20 meters to 18 meters, which is more than enough on River Road. There is the site, and there's the 3 units being proposed, the duplexes on the west side, on the east side. With the driveway to 216th, and then the 2 rear units are facing the lane with their garages there. And again, the form is very single family in nature. Walkways to the front doors, as you can see, as a single family home would be, with 1 unit behind. And then instead of facing a bunch of paved area, they have a courtyard in the middle of the site, which all the units face to, which hopefully will improve the sociability of everybody in the community. There's a courtyard. There's the rendition of it. Again, the building height is increased to accommodate those peaked roofs on the eaves. So it kind of more reflective of single family. Again, remember, single families can go to this height. So these will be very in keeping with new development. There are probably a lot of just 2-story homes, older homes in this area, but in theory, redevelopment could go to a form like this. So those are the rear units facing the lane, which garages to them. And they're very similar in single family character, new homes, gabled roofs, different materials, 3-story form. So, they do have, decent front yards. Remember, much of the boulevard will be kept as grass. So it'll really, the perception of them being closer to the street will probably be lost for most people because of the design of them. So they look like a tidy little project, in my opinion. So again, we're recommending it move forward to 2nd reading. Public hearing will occur next. There'll be the normal rezoning servicing agreements for the offsite works. We are within 800 meters of the highway, so Ministry of Transportation will have to be consulted and approve the bylaw. Some road dedication, geotechnical covenant. The site is not contaminated, which is good. Stormwater management covenant will be required, and they will have to pay the CAC contribution of $5,700 per unit. 3 of them would be charged that. So with that, I'm done.
Thank you very much. Can I get a motion to refer this to council? It's been moved by Councillor Duick, seconded by Councillor Tan. I'll open it up for questions. Councillor Schiller.
Thank you, Chair. Staff, can you just clarify for me on the photos? There's some blue lines shown. Can you just
Sure. If we
tell me what those are?
raise those again, I can help. Was that on the site plan? You're thinking?
I feel like it's on the aerial photograph.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's some sort of waterway, but I just want to make sure I understand what it means when I see that.
There may be a remnant ditch on the corner, maybe, that they're talking about.
Patrick, are you able to pull up the aerial photograph?
Maybe.
Yeah.
So those, maybe. Oh, that's right. Yes, I think it's because this is an unfinished road. It's very, undeveloped on this side because the property's never redeveloped. They're going to be, those ditches are being enclosed into the stormwater system, and curb and gutter, sidewalk, street trees will be provided around the site. It's just a remnant ditch, I believe.
Okay, but that work will be done as part of this
They will.
redevelopment.
That's right. This will have to be to an urban standard, which will be curb and gutter and sidewalk, street trees, that sort of stuff, improvements.
Great. Yeah, it is a neat look project.
Yes,
so
it will.
something nice to
I
see.
think it'll be a very
Thank you.
new, nice thing we can point to.
Yeah.
If they do this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff, not to compare apples to oranges, but predominantly for the benefit of the public. If we can clarify why we're proceeding with second reading on this application that is within the Fraser River escarpment, while the previous application had a condition that it would not go through second reading until that risk assessment was completed.
Thank you. It's a good point. We're only dealing with one unit there now and three additional units being placed there. So we've just made the decision, I think, is that the risk is still quite low for this level of density. It's only when we're talking about the group risk that it begins to occur with a real multifamily sort of development, an apartment, townhouses potentially. This is still quite low density, and we were considering it more of a single family form than multifamily.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just double checking, Councillor Dozie, seeing no further discussion. Those in favor? And it's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 5.4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 5.4 pertains to a future construction of a townhouse complex and dedicated conservation area. And Mr. McMullen is going to be doing this presentation.
Good morning. This application here at the intersection of 104th Avenue and 240th Street is being considered for first and second reading of the OCP amending bylaw and second reading of the zone amending bylaw. The site is now designated medium density residential and conservation. That is not proposed to change, except the conservation areas are proposed to be expanded with the OCP amendment, reflecting the detailed work done during the application process. The existing zoning is RS2, single detached suburban residential. It's currently RM1, low density townhouse residential is a proposed zoning. The site area is approximately 3.4 acres and 64 units are being proposed. This is a subject site with 3 existing rural residential properties outlined in red. It's a site on the OCP land use map showing the medium density residential designation and the conservation designation at the northwest corner of the site. And this is the ortho photo showing the site with the existing tree character of the creek corridor and the school to the east and some of the emerging townhouse developments in the area. So as noted, this application is to rezone the subject site to RM1 low density townhouse residential to permit 64 townhouse units. All units will have 3 bedrooms and double side-by-side garages, meeting the requirements of off-street loading and parking bylaw. The application is proposing a density of 0.75 FSR, which is the maximum allowed in the zone, with the payment of the density bonus contribution of $198,400. The OCP amendment, as noted previously, is to expand the conservation area designation that's been shown on the map to reflect the amount being dedicated for conservation park, which reflects the detailed environmental reports done for the site. So it's expanding to a 30-meter setback for the conservation area. The application is also subject to the community amenity contribution program for an estimated contribution of $364,800. Site contains, as noted, 3 parcels of land. There are a number of tree clusters on the site and a drainage ditch running along 240th Street. Spencer Creek runs along the north end of the site. It's being dedicated, as previously noted. There will also be a public amenity trail proposed to be located within the creek corridor of 2.5 meters in width, as requested by Parks, leading from 240th to the east. And there's also a swale proposed on site on 240, just off of 240th Street, which is to provide alternative habitat enhancement to the existing drainage ditch, which is in the 240th Street road allowance, which is going to be removed with the widening of the road. So this is a enhanced environmental compensation feature that runs along the site from north to south, which is being looked at extensively with environment and engineering staff. There's also a reciprocal easement required to provide driveway access to the northeast corner of this site to provide access to the site to the north, as it's basically landlocked. It's Spencer Creek seals it off from 240th Street, so there's no road access. So an easement would be needed to allow for any future development of that site. And this happens from time to time when there's no other alternative access to an adjacent site. If this application proceeds through to the development permit and development variance permit stage, after a possible third reading, there would be a proposed setback relaxation of 7.5 meters to 3.4 for portions of the site along the east side of the site, and also to reduce the front setback on 104th Avenue from 7.5 to 5.9 meters. And these would be noted in a future development permit and development variance permit to council, should the application proceed to that stage. This is a site plan showing the project with the driveway access off of 240th. In the northeast corner is that proposed driveway extension that would go to the site to the north because of the Spencer Creek corridor, which is partly on this site and largely on the site to the north that doesn't allow access to 240th Street. You note there's also to the east a conceptual layout of how the development parcel to the east would work out in the future if it were to develop in the future. Just ask for that because there's a small parcel and we want to make sure it's feasible to be developed in the future and not orphaned by this. The site also features a number of internal walkways leading from the west through to the east to provide pedestrian access ease throughout the site. The amenity area on the site, indoor amenity areas on the north side of the site next to the conservation area. There's also outdoor amenity space there adjacent to that indoor amenity space, and also an informal court area to the south that's located just off of 104th Avenue. These are some of the sample elevations. Of course, there's a number of elevations. They're all in the same theme as this. This is, I think, a building one showing the rear elevation to the internal driveway on the top upper picture, and then the front elevations that would face out to either the Muse on the site or 240th Street. Here's another example of the internal drive-by elevation and the pedestrian-oriented elevation. And this is the landscape plan showing the site with the soft and hard landscaping features. Just of note, the site does include 145 trees to be replanted, which is consistent with what our arborists and our environment report section require for such developments. And the recommendations are here. I'll just very briefly summarize them. They're quite long. The first one is regarding the necessary public consultation being met for the OCP amendment for the expansion of the conservation area of this application. The next one is the OCP amendment requirements to be considered in conjunction with the capital waste management plan, the capital expenditure plan and the waste management plan, and to be consistent with the capital expenditure plan, the waste management plan. As it's not changing density, it's consistent with those. It's just changing the amount of conservation space, and that this OCP amending bylaw be given first and second reading, forwarded to public hearing, and the zone amending bylaw be given second reading as amended and forward to the same public hearing, and the following conditions be met prior to final reading. And these include the standard rezoning servicing agreement as a covenant on title, road dedication for widening of 240th and 104th Avenue, park dedication is required, including the multi-purpose trail along the north side of the site, consolidation of the subject properties, a geotechnical report, which will be registered as a covenant also on title, the reciprocal easement for access to the site to the north, as mentioned previously, stormwater management covenant, and of course, removal of existing buildings, confirming that there's no underground storage tanks on the site that from the existing homes that could be an environmental hazard. and the voluntary amenity contributions and the NZ bonus contributions as previously mentioned outlined on the screen. Madam Chair and committee.
Thank you very much. Can I get a motion to refer this to council? It's been moved by Councillor Tan, seconded by Mayor Rumi. Okay, I'll open it up for questions. Councillor Youssef?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to staff for the presentation. Just a couple of real quick questions. Having discussed before the policy of access, can we elaborate on why we're going with access off of 240th rather than 104th? And is that only to accommodate the property to the north, as was mentioned?
Early in the development process, this application came in 2 years ago. That was one of the considerations to provide access to the property to the north. I think the applicant also saw that led to a better layout for the site. I don't recall any other discussion on that being 2 years ago. I'll defer to engineering if they have more comments on that.
No, and I thank you. And through the chair, I think that was the predominant consideration. Given that we're at second reading here, I think staff would also like an opportunity to take another look at that access management policy in relation to this certain application. So as we move through the process here, the staff will report back at the next opportunity with council and just to have a conversation about that access.
Thank you for that clarification. And through you, Madam Chair, to staff, has there been any discussion with the owner of the property to the north to possibly consolidate so as to not have that landlocked area and rather have the entire area develop as has been characteristic of the neighborhood?
Through to Councillor Youssef, I'll have to look back at the notes in the files. This was over 2 years ago. There were some discussions, I recall. The site to the north is separated due to the creek corridor to the north. So I think that was part of an impediment. I'll have to look back in the notes as it was over 2 years ago.
Thank you for those clarifications. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you. So Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question through you to staff about the park dedication in the north there.
Yes.
Just to clarify, so does that become city land or is that?
Yes, that will become city land.
Okay, and so it'll be managed by the city as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and just to clarify, would there be clear signage that is public land and not just available to the residents of the townhouse youth complex?
There'll be the normal signage for parks. I could talk to park. There'll be a signage probably for the trail, but I could confirm the amount of signage. It definitely will be made clear that it's not part of the site. It's dedicated.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. I'm just wondering, normally we would get the letter from the school district when it comes to second reading, but this one's not coming to us until later. Do we know when it's coming? Only because, you know, Tuscanela was full by 12:01.
Yes, Madam Chair, we will request that the school district send that as soon as possible before public hearing, if possible.
Okay. I think I've said this, obviously the school district piece is really important to me. We're making these decisions, in particular in the east. So that's something that I hope we can include in future packages. And then the geotechnical stuff, I saw it was in one of the recommendations. Does the geotechnical get done after final reading then, or is it done before? Is it done between public and final?
The geotech report is done during rezoning. It's typically done about this time. Sometimes it's done earlier on, but we get a geotech report that will be registered on title as part of a covenant due to the creek corridor and the sloping nature of the site.
Okay.
At building permit, there may be a more detailed one to do with the specific engineering of the site and the structural engineering of the site.
Okay, yeah, I think both the city and the school had some challenges in that area. And then the other question I have is around, so will this increase street parking, this development? Only because if you go anywhere near this area between like 1 and 5, it's almost impossible to get parked on the street.
Right. I will just defer to engineering if there would be street parking. I don't think there would be on 240th.
Because you're going up like almost half a kilometer to get any street parking in that area now.
So thank you. So through the chair, we can certainly look at that. My initial stance would likely be that given the proximity of the intersection, there's probably not a lot of additional street parking we could achieve by this application. But we can certainly take that away between now and public hearing to consider that.
Thanks, because even, the reality is you give them 2 parking spots, they're still gonna need street parking.
Madam Chair, just in that regard, I note that the applicant is providing 16 visitor spots and the bylaw only requires 13. So there's 3 additional
Yeah.
visitor spots.
Yeah, the visitor spots don't help
Yeah.
if you have 3 cars
No,
in
I
the
know.
family, when you have teenagers, yeah, or young adults. Seeing no other questions, just double check with Councillor Doze. Okay, no other questions. All those in favor of referring.
Councilor Dozy does have his card up.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Doze. Thank you.
I know this is, sorry, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I know that this is become a recurrent question, but I just wanted to confirm, do we require the usual roughing for EVs charging in this kind of development? If yes, my question will be, will there be adequate arrangement made by way of supplying the needed access to electricity? Because when you say roughing, you might mean just putting where they're going to either run it from here to here without providing sufficient power, the ampage that is required to accommodate this kind of thing in the this kind of recharging. My question is, do we need to provide this in this kind of development, number one? And secondly, if we do need to provide the roughing that is usually required, are we making adequate arrangement? Does that include adequate arrangement for power supply within the facility? Thank you.
Madam Chair, through to Councillor Dozing Committee, each unit has to have the rough-in of the level 2 parking, electric parking facility, and 50% of the visitor spaces require the rough-in of the level 2 240-volt parking facility. To the point about the capacity, I guess, of the panel for the site, I could talk to building department about that. If we're saying it's to be roughed in, I would say that for 240 volts, we need to have that in the panel, the actual circuit breaker panel. If I could check on that. That's what he's asking.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm asking, because there are situations where you say roughing, there won't be room in the panel to accommodate this. Then that will mean almost changing the entire panel to accommodate this kind of thing when you finally want to do it. So I want to understand that roughing means that adequate provision will be made from the beginning to accommodate this if and when it's required to be completed.
Right. I will just confirm that with the building department on that point.
Thank you. And I just want to double check something you just said in response to Councillor Doze. Did you say that there's a requirement for electrification of the visitor spots as well?
Yes, the bylaw requires for townhouse projects that 50% of the visitor spots have rough-in, and each of the parking garages for each unit have a rough-in.
Thank you. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly. Okay, so I'm seeing no, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Tan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And just for a newbie here, when we say rough-in, so I understand that there will be that, I'm not sure if I understand the definition of rough-in. So there'll be, if I show up, will I be able to plug my car in?
No, rough-in would be that you have the outlet box in the wall and the wire going through the wall. So that is rough-in. It's just that there won't be actually the receptacle for the charging. And I'm going to check on the comment about the question for Councillor Dozy about the transformer panel.
So I'm just going to ask a very newbie question here. If there's a rough-in, but there's no thing for me to plug my car in, how am I going to plug my car in?
I think the thought was, from having looked at this here and in other municipalities, is that the rough-in is because early on, and still to some extent, 240 volt charging is different for each car manufacturer. So the 240 volt wiring is in and the box in the wall is in, but a General Motors car has a different plug than, say, a Tesla car. So that's.
So I'm just going down the newbie line. I'm just trying to understand if I'm here, if I visit my friend who lives in a townless complex and I've gotten and I go to visitor parking, and I understand it's rough-in, but how am I actually going to make it happen?
Oh, each owner would then have to go and actually provide the plug to finish the rough-in process. So,
but in the visitor parking area,
the visitor
who would
parking
be in charge of that?
The strata would have to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can plug into regular as well, just takes a long time to charge. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just double checking, no further questions on this. Okay, All right, all those in favor of referring to council tonight? Hey, it's been passed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5.5.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 5.5 pertains to a development variance permit that asks to reduce the visual clearance at a lane and to reduce access and egress at a driveway. And Ms. Cooper is going to be doing the presentation for this.
The application before you is Development Variance Permit 2021-264. It's with respect to a pre-zoned piece of land. The existing OCP is single-family residential and conservation on the property, but the conservation does not apply to the proposed lot 13. Well, it's actually lot 13 because it's being registered. The existing zoning is R2 and the proposed zoning is R3. Wow, did I make a mistake here? The site area is 1 hectare in area because at the time this was not subdivided, but currently it has been subdivided into the lots, and we have lot 13. And unfortunately, the subject map is going to change in the future, but right now that's the property. The site plan in the neighborhood context, which is a little dated because the property to the west is under development and there's building permit applications that have been issued on it. So the proposed variance is with respect to zoning bylaw 76/2019. It's to reduce the visual clearance at a lane from 6 meters to 4.15 meters for proposed lot 13, actually lot 13. To reduce access and egress, driveways being permitted in either direction from the point of intersection of an existing side lot line or rear lot line from 7.5 meters to 4.1 meters for lot 13. And I don't have a pointer, but lot 13 is down in the southeast corner of the site plan. And before you is a diagram and within your package showing the proposed variance on the lane and 232nd Street. And sort of some background for some councillors that weren't on the previous council. There was a development permit issued for this property previously as identified in the report on April 12th, 2022. That approved the form and character and design of the site, but under the process, all of the variances requested under the old zoning bylaw were not all captured, and this is one of them. And so it's been brought forward to you as basically a housekeeping amendment because it was not captured at the time of the initial development permit. And so it has to be varied under our current bylaw. And the recommendation is that the development variance permit be approved.
Thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Councillor Dueck to refer this to council. Any questions on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? And it has carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 5.6.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 5.6 is a development permit to permit the construction of a 5-story apartment and to waive the requirements to upgrade the collector road standard, reduce setbacks, and increase maximum building height. And Mr. Goddard is going to be doing this presentation.
Thank you, Council. Pine Street is a very residential street, which has a strange oddity in that it has an apartment zoning on a property on the northeast corner. And this is why we're here today. There's a development permit and a development variance permit required, but it is zoned. So the city cannot ignore that fact. The use is permitted, the proposal is permitted, and we're looking at it today under these two applications. It is urban residential. It's largely single family in the area, except for this particular property. There was a previous apartment on the site, much more modest, given its age from the 60s probably, and it's been demolished, and the applicant is proceeding with this new proposal that meets the conditions largely of the RM2 zone, with some variances being requested to accommodate it. It's almost three-quarters of an acre in size, a very large site for the neighborhood, and that's because of the previous use. There it is, the north end of the cul-de-sac in River area. Again, this building is in the Fraser area escarpment, and thus it can proceed because it is zoned, but before we issue a building permit for it, or if council approves the variance permits and the DP, it will have to wait for the Fraser River escarpment studies to be concluded. There is the site. There was the existing building. So the new building is on a very similar location, but of course it's much larger in height than the previous two-story building. The hospital is to the north. So it's a 5-story apartment being proposed. There's 64 units, a market strata proposal. The building features both indoor and outdoor areas. There is a roof garden. The 5th floor has actually been set back from the main body of the building and to the north, facing more of the hospital and the street area rather than the single family homes to the south and to the east, as a way of trying to reduce the scale and massing of the building. Again, there is outdoor amenity areas on the rooftop, which is a nice feature for the building and does force the units away from the edge of the building facing south and east. We have ground floor units, of course, they're all individually accessed, which is a nice feature. The setbacks on the south and east are quite large in comparison to some variances typically requested for buildings of this size and scale. We have 2 levels of underground parking being proposed. There's 109 parking spaces internally to the site, and that does meet our bylaw. They also meet the conditions of our short-term and long-term biking provisions for the building as well under the bylaw. So the variances being proposed are 4, and they include the varying of the Pine Street Collector Road standard. An apartment usually under the bylaw requires to have a collector road standard, which is wider, but it could not be accommodated well here, given the location on the cul-de-sac. And so engineering and us have agreed that this is an acceptable variance to this site because the parking can be provided in the building as well. There's no variances to parking required. We're looking at a reduced setback on the front from 7.5 meters to just slight change there to 7.3 meters. This is the typical setback you'll find on this street. We're also looking at an internal to the north to the hospital in a way to try and push the building away from the south and eastern neighbors, reducing the setback on the north from 7.5 meters to 5 meters, as well as putting that 5th story element on this edge of the project. The building height has to increase slightly from 50 feet to 53.5 feet or so. And that's accommodating elements of the design that's kind of improvements to the overall look of the building. So this is the site plan showing the building. This is the development permit drawings. You can see that there are healthy setbacks to the east and west, although of course this is a larger mass building than the single family, which are typically 2 stories in this area with mature landscaping around the perimeter of those existing lots. You can see the access has been placed on the north next to the hospital as an attempt to, again, avoid that being on the southern edge of the property, affecting more of the single family home there. The reduced setbacks are to the north, shown in red there, and those are the edges of the building. And again, the healthier setbacks are to the east and south and front. This is the scale of the building, and you can see it's 4-story in form with 3 levels of balconies and then the rooftop balcony. This is the east elevation and west elevation. The west faces the street. The east faces the single family homes along the street to the east. And again, the 5th story is set back from the edge of the building to try and reduce its visual impact. These are sections through the building, again, showing the 2 levels of underground parking on grade with a 5-story element above and 4 stories along the south and east side of the building. This is a quick rendering from the north, northeast, northwest, I'd say. And the single family homes are on the top of this rendering. So the building tries to move and address the accesses to the north for both the main entrance to the building as well as the access for the vehicles. There we are, the proposed variances again. There are some trees existing on the eastern property lines that the building has been adjusted in the underground parking to try and accommodate the long-term survival of those trees on the neighboring properties. There are, of course, some trees that will be removed on this site to accommodate the building and its scale, as well as the underground parking structure, but there'll be a significant replanting as well. And efforts have been made to try an additional planting along the perimeters to help the neighbors to the south and east. This clearly shows proposed variances, and there's a typical single-family home on the neighboring property to the south. So the scale will be a bit of an impact. That's no doubting it. But the site is zoned, and we're accommodating 60 or so more units here in this situation. So with that, we're recommending as staff that we move forward. Variance permits will be required. The development permit would be issued as well if council sees fit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I get a motion to refer this to council? It's been moved by Mayor Rumi and seconded by Councillor Youssef. Questions? Mayor Rumi, Councillor Youssef, and then Councillor Schiller.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess the challenge that I have, it's right there at the hospital. And we've had major challenges with parking to date already. How much of these plans have incorporated that challenge into, like, is this going to make things even worse in that area for there? Because right now staff are parking or people are parking anywhere.
Right.
They're taking away parking from the residents that are already living in that area. How much does this impact that?
Well, it's a good question. Historically, this road used to actually extend into the hospital site. It was closed off, and now there's quite a difference of grade changes between Pine Street and the hospital site with redevelopment. And I don't even think there's a pedestrian connection at the moment. I think there may be no, there won't be even with this application. So there's quite a barrier between the hospital and this. You couldn't actually physically walk from this site north to the hospital. You'd have to go around. So again, parking on this street is a small street right now because it's the nature of single family. We have introduced parking restrictions on the neighborhoods to the west of the hospital to try and avoid some of that. But people tend to try and avoid paying a fee when they can, I'm afraid. But it would be a fairly long walk from this street around to the hospital because there's no direct link, I believe.
Thank you.
Through the chair, just to Mayor Rumi, just to build on Mr. Goddard's comments, there actually is a policy that speaks to resident exempt and resident only parking, where a neighborhood, if they are impacted such in an area such like this, that they can work with the city to set some restrictions on parking. And so the residents, if this became a challenge in this area, would have an opportunity to apply to the city to restrict parking based upon that policy. Thank you.
I'm fine for now.
Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to staff. My question is actually on the other side of the fence of Mayor Rumi's. I was considering if there would have been the possibility to have this building, since, as was mentioned, it is unique to the neighborhood, and everywhere else around it is single family. This is a unique zoning in that area. My question would be through the chair to staff, has there been consideration to possibly giving pedestrian access to the hospital and approaching Fraser Health to possibly look at this as a housing or an accommodation for hospital workers, thereby not only mitigating transportation back and forth of hospital workers, the parking that would come of it, but to basically have this be an attachment, if you will, to the hospital to service that and be a housing opportunity for hospital workers that is immediately adjacent to their place of work. Again, reducing their travel time, carbon footprint, and requirements for parking.
As far as I know, Counselor, that it hasn't occurred. This is a residential multiple family site.
Mhm.
It's not institutional designated. It's not zoned for institution. So at the moment, it's proposing what they think they can do there.
My apologies,
Thank you.
Madam Chair, through the staff. That wasn't my intention, is to zone it for institutional. I would keep the zoning as is, keep it as privately owned. However, to have that negotiation or understanding that hospital workers would have, if you will, first bids to reside in the building that's going up. Has that been considered?
I don't believe it has.
Thank you. And again, realizing that we're at the development permit, I'm not going to meddle with it. I just wanted to ask that question.
Thank you.
Thank you to staff. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Schiller.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly exactly what we're deciding here. So this particular property is zoned to have an apartment building constructed upon it, and it's really the variances
That's right.
that we're looking at here specifically. And are any of the adjacent properties zoned the same way, or are all the properties around it
No,
single family?
unfortunately, they're all single family in nature and they'll remain that. They're zoned for that. This is just a historical anomaly.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it just makes it a little more complicated to think about what that means for the neighborhood. So the road collector standard requirement, can you just explain to me, sort of
Sure.
To a person walking by,
Sure.
what that looks
Sure.
like when that's done?
It would be a bigger impact into their site. So the building, the design, the underground would have to change to accommodate. It would essentially be widening out the cul-de-sac another 4 or 5 feet, and that would have impact on the site. So the purpose of it, given this context, we can accommodate a cul-de-sac as we see on these plans in this setting on a quite a local road. And this design we have here can accommodate the access and the needs of this building. It's not like it's at the beginning of the street and it would affect everybody. It's at the end of the street. So it's really only impacting this building, has been the argument.
That's exactly was one thing I was trying to understand, whether there's a requirement to do something to the other properties along the road, but no, it
No.
just is this property. And as you say,
Bylaw is worded in such a way that when you put this sort of density, it needs a certain standard road and finishes. And we'd normally get that in every case, but in this case, it's really not needed. And it would have an impact on the design of the project. So we decided
Right.
we could support a variance.
okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
welcome.
Counselor Tan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will we be requiring streetlights and sidewalks as a condition of this development?
There would be most likely a street light if there isn't one already at the end of the cul-de-sac, as well as curb and gutter and sidewalk would be built along the frontage of the property.
Okay. And my last question is just whether we can give residents in areas some reassurance that the developers will respect construction noise bylaws, respect safety in neighboring properties. Are residents aware of the number to call if that is not the case? And what regulatory mechanisms does the city have?
Right. We have a noise bylaw and it regulates the hours in which construction can commence and has to end and what days you can do that. A call to the city, the bylaw department would certainly get a bylaw officer out there quickly to investigate. So that's the mechanism.
Counselor Doze.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know I had during the presentation mention made about the trees that will be planted in the new construction area. I just wanted to reconfirm that my ears were not deceiving me, that the interest of the adjoining or neighboring single family homes, their privacy is taken into account in the planting of those trees in such a way that these are trees that will grow up to kind of give them some level of privacy and not just ordinary shrubs. Can you please confirm to me?
Sure. If you look at the site plans that they show the underground parking structure, there are circles that show the existing trees on the neighboring properties, and they've modified the design to try and ensure the root zones of some of those trees will survive. But I must tell council that, you know, there will be a large excavation here, and it will impact all the vast majority of the trees on their own site. And it is a bit of a risk of neighboring properties of vegetation on other lots, but they've done what they can to preserve the trees. They're not taking any trees down off of their property. And that's what they have to do. But I think it's fair to say that the landscaping that will be replaced will not hide this building to the neighbors. Over the years, their landscaping plan is fairly robust. But again, a lot of these plantings are being placed on the top of an underground parking structure, and you know, they will have limited growth over the years. So the neighbors will have their buffers preserved if they're on their property. Some of their mature trees will be preserved, and they can plant, of course, along their own boundaries. But you know, they're a 25-foot setback from the building to their own property line. But I must admit, there will be an impact to neighbors visually through the loss of some of the trees that they currently enjoy on the development site. And I know we've received some letters of concern about these issues.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, what you said made a lot of sense, that when you plant on top of an underground parking concrete base, that that will limit the height of the trees. And I think the most important thing to me is to make sure that due diligence is taken into account in whatever we are doing, to make sure that we just do not ignore people who live around there and say to hell with you or something like that. For as long as we did what we're supposed to do and made every effort to protect them the best we can, given the circumstance we have, I think you've done okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, the one thing I would add is the arborist for the project and the landscape architect have committed to being on site when the excavation is occurring to try and act as referee between the neighbors and the development, and trying to reduce the impact to ensure the survivability of trees off the property and all that. So they're going to do what they can, I think, to be good neighbors.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks. I'm just going to add a couple of questions before we go to second round. I just want to double check. So this has already been approved to go to 4 levels.
The zoning permits higher than that. It permits up to 5. So,
Okay.
but some of the design features on the elevations are exceeding the height because there's some architectural elements of about 4 or 5 feet.
Okay.
At certain
I'm
points.
just trying to understand. So the variance is to take it from 4 stories to 5 stories. Item number 4. It's to increase the maximum building height for principal buildings and structures from 4 stories to 5 stories.
I guess you could argue that it's probably even a bit higher than that, I would argue, with some of those design elements. So yes, it would be from 4 to 5. And again, council, nobody is building 4-story apartments anymore. They're actually looking to do 6 stories in wood frame. This is 5, which is a good thing. They couldn't accommodate any more parking. And that's what probably limited the proposal. Again, if it was zoning, council could probably take a stronger stand on that issue, but this is a variance. We could refuse the variance, and they'd have to then go back and decide how to modify the design. So that's where council's power rests in with this application, with the variances being requested. If they were denied, they'd have to somehow figure out a way
They
to
would
work
have to-
around them.
How to build it in a
Correct.
lower,
But it would
in a
still
lower
be a
height.
4-story.
And how big is the apartment that's already there?
It was 9 units. I believe it was a 2-story form though.
2-story. And has it already been
It's
demolished?
demolished. some
Okay,
time
so
ago.
the
Correct.
residents have been looked
Correct.
after already. And so the streets around them are quite residential streets. So we're putting a significant higher number of vehicles and residents on these streets. Are these streets able to accommodate? Again, I understand that, but if we say no to the variance to the height, does that reduce the number of
Units and
Units.
cars? Yes, it would. It would reduce it by, I think the 5th floor occupies 6 units, I believe, 6 or 8 units. So you would lose 6 units off that, and potentially then they would, and then that would be minimum of 10 stalls or 10 vehicles potentially.
Okay. And then, sorry, back to the original question I started to go with when I asked the second one, is the traffic, is the street network able to handle that increase in traffic?
The residents might not agree, but it is a short street and there are going to be significantly more vehicles than there were previously. There's no vehicles going to the site now, but it is a local road and access to River Road is probably pretty efficient right now.
So maybe just to build upon that, and so it is a local road, has a very low traffic volume currently, being that it has the cul-de-sac dead end portion to it. This development is 64 units, so just back of the napkin trip generation for that, we'll probably see approximately 25 vehicles per peak hour of additional traffic. The road can certainly handle that capacity wise. And so it's not a matter of traffic engineering and volume over capacity decision. Yeah, so it can handle it.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Understanding this is a development variance permit application and not rezoning, at what point do we get to talk about unit mix?
It's a development permit. You could talk about that, but council, remember, you have far more power and control at the rezoning stage about those issues. A development permit is simply that, it's a permit. We have guidelines and those permit conditions have to be met or close to being met. And we tell you about that in the report. It would be imprudent for council to deny a development permit, in my opinion, on not meeting some of those guidelines. Council can, but it's very rare because it's not the same discussion. It's not, the land use has already been determined. Whether you like the building design and all that, it's really what you're looking at in the question. It's the variance that gives you even more power because you can decide to not vary a bylaw based upon that. So the development permit, in my opinion, has been met. The ADP has approved it and it should be approved. If council has struggling with it, it should be on the variance components and whether you want to relax the bylaw to accommodate the design.
Right. So through the chair, I'm trying to understand. So in terms of, I understand the land use question is done that this area is zoned for multifamily, and just walking me through it. My quibble is not or concern is not with the thing specifically on the application, but so at this point, does council have control over the unit mix? Because I'm not interested in saying no to this variance permit, like on the pretense that I have an issue with one of the things here when my real concerns with the unit mix. What's the level?
I would say you do not. I wouldn't be using that as a mechanism to deny the permit because it's not a form and character design element. That's much more striking on what the project is. That's a zoning condition. And even then, I mean, council has the authority of absolute in rezoning, but we don't have provisions that say council is expecting this percentage of these units, this percentage of those units, that's something we don't have. So it's a judgment call. And I don't think we can really exercise that in this case with this development permit, but the variance is where you can exercise some judgment.
Okay, last question to you, Madam Chair. If we deny this DVP and then we say, well, you have to stick to 4 stories instead of 5, what's impact do staff expect this will have on the financial feasibility of this project?
Significant, I would say. You're certainly able to do that. The applicant would have to then go back and look at his performance and decide, can he make the project work in the form with the number of units being reduced and work within the bylaw provisions. I would think they've probably looked at that already, but they are not wanting to do that. But certainly that's something council's free to do.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so I'm seeing no further discussions. And just to be clear, the motion that we're voting on right now is to refer it to council, where we'd make the decision on whether we approve or not would be at council later today. So the motion right now is just to refer it to council tonight. And it has already been moved and seconded. I'm seeing no further discussion. All those in favor? Okay, and it has carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item. I just want to double check if we're on 5.7. 5.7. Sorry, got myself a little bit lost there on the paper. 5.7.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a development variance permit that's seeking to vary the front and side setbacks and to also amend the covenant that's registered on title to reflect the new design. And Mr. Goddard, I believe, is presenting on this one as well.
Sorry, I've got so many, I've forgotten which one's mine and which ones aren't. A few number of staff away today. Maple Crescent at 20581 Maple Crescent, a development variance permit. This is an institutional use. It's phase 2 of an existing treatment center. This is our InterVisions folks down in Hammond. I have a sweet spot for these folks. They've done incredibly good work over the years. They've done 2 or 3 facilities, Hannah House on Dewdney Trunk, and the first phase of this project some time ago. They really helped us deal with a few significant problems over the years and helped a lot of people. So this is the second phase. When we built the first phase, we had a covenant placed on the property that kind of outlined what the second phase would be. And it's very similar to it, but there is some adjustments we do have to make in that covenant to deal with parking and a few other little setback issues. But there's the site. And there's the new phase 1 on the left there and the older building on the right on 206th Street. Unfortunately, the darn thing does project across the property line, so we have to deal with that as well. But the new second phase will propose to demolish the building and reattach it to the new building for a new facility that'll expand their treatment options. Again, it's the second phase of the project, and the first phase proceeded in 2013. This is a men's facility. Their women's facility is on Hannah House on Dewdney Trunk and Lady. So the requirements is to reduce the parking from 1 space less than 6 under the bylaw for a private hospital. As we all know, these folks who are here do not drive. So we have had no problem with the ability of the current facility to deal with that. And there is some street parking available down here. We have a front yard setback, which is on the east side, being reduced from 7.5 meters to 5.5 meters. And this is to accommodate the new building, and a reduced setback along the south along Maple reflects what the current phase 1 has, and it'll be down to 2.87 meters from 7.5, but it does reflect the earlier phase, which was approved. So there's the building, and the orange area is the lawn spaces that'll be created around the new building that'll be attached to the first phase. And it'll be a structure on the east side. So those are the variants being required: parking, a setback on Battle Street, and a variance on the south side. So we're recommending the variances be approved and let them proceed with their next phase. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a motion to refer to council, moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Mayor Rumi. Questions on this one? Mayor Rumi, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Personally, it sounds like a good project, which I think is something that we need here. Coming back to the parking, it's a parking day for me. The treatment facility that they're proposing to put in, is that on a daily basis, or is that, I guess the question comes down to, are there residents moving in, and therefore where are they going to park their cars and how many of them? So going from 5 to 4 doesn't sound like a big issue, but I am curious to know what the purpose of the new facility is, and is it, do you understand where I'm going?
Right.
Yeah.
My understanding is these are not standalone units. Like, they won't have kitchen facilities and that. They still have to eat in the common facility, but I think they've advanced slightly more in their progress of improvement. But it's almost like a second stage housing, is my understanding. So could they have vehicles? From speaking to the applicant, he says they really haven't advanced to that point yet, but they've certainly completed their first recovery stages and are still within the community.
Okay. Is there, and again, I think it's great to have this type of facility. I do worry, like, I'm not going to assume that they wouldn't own cars. But if they are living there, that could present a challenge for parking if I don't know what the maximum number of residents that they would have there, because it would be a live-in facility.
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's right. I don't know off the top of my head either. Unfortunately, I don't see anybody here from the group.
Okay.
But I could maybe make a phone call for you this evening before council and maybe get that
Excuse
answer
me,
for you.
Mr. Goddard, we do have the architect online,
Okay, perfect.
Mr. Jeonying Yum. If I can get Mr. Yum to unmute.
Hi, this is Jane from JY Architecture. I hear your question. It's not really proper for me to confirm because I'm the architect, not involved in their operation. But as Chuck mentioned, they don't have a kitchen. It's not like a long-term stay, more like a treatment, short-term wise. And when I go through this parking variance application, the facility owner confirmed that their patient very rarely drive a car and park somewhere. It's mostly staff, and many times they just drop off. So they convinced me they don't have any parking issues, even though it's short and we expand. So that's what I know, but the ultimate confirmation should come from the owner.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, referring it to council. And it has carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, down to item number 10, which is a community forum. Mr. Havlick Windsor, would you like to walk through?
Yes.
The public forum, the community forum piece?
So each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak to council, and I'm going to see if we have anyone online right now that would like to raise their hand virtually to be placed in the queue, or if we have anyone in chambers that would like to speak.
So I'm not seeing anybody address us in chambers, and I'm not seeing anybody put their hand up. Okay, all right. So then I guess the last item of the agenda is adjournment, and seeing that we've come to the end of business, I'll just call the meeting adjourned at 12:40 p.m. Thank you very much to everybody joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
We'll be going into close.